this morning, we are fortunate to have Doug Moyer joining us from Central Star Cooperative. Doug is a Michigan native. He grew up on a swine and beef operation near Traverse City, but has been working for Central Star, excuse me, for the past 12 years. And currently he serves as the Director of Dairy Herd Information Services for the cooperative. An expert in PCDart, he serves as a reference person for people within their network on how to use this software efficiently. And so looking forward to his presentation. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Doug. And thanks again, Doug, for being willing to do this, and look forward to learning a few things from you.
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be involved in it. I hope I can find some value today as we go through PCDart and some of the tools and tricks that are hidden deep within it. I found it interesting, you know, as Barry said, we kind of pulled this together pretty quick. And I think we've got some good things to cover, but in the midst of COVID-19 and the reason that we're all, you know, shut in at home, had some conversations with one of our laboratory managers yesterday, and she mentioned some frustration on being able to make good decisions in the absence of clear information. And I thought how telling that was about what we're going to talk about here today, which is making sense of data and helping producers make good decisions. That's what this is all about, is being able to really dig into the numbers, dig into what's hidden inside a producer's data, and help them make clearer decisions and understand things better. So in the midst of a situation where there's a lot of gray area right now, and we're wading through, at least as it pertains to a producer's information, hopefully we can bring some clarity. And just kind of to set the stage for kind of what I'm going to present today. Barry had asked me what to title it, and we came up with tips and tricks. I certainly wouldn't presume to try to teach anybody how to analyze or to consult on a dairy or to debate the right way to look at certain metrics. What I'm hoping to do is simply show you how to get to certain places, how to use tools that will allow you to apply your own flavor of consulting and your own knowledge to it. So inherently, I'll use and reference certain ways of looking at things, but I hope that what you take from this is the ability to dig in and find your own way of presenting the information. And the last apology I'll make, it's never good to start off a presentation with apologizing, but if I do have kids, as many of you I'm sure do, running around somewhere in your homes right now, they've been given some rules, but as you well know, we'll see how close they follow them. If they make an appearance or buzz by the camera, I'll apologize in advance. So with all of that, we'll dive in. I'm going to bounce back and forth. I've got a little bit of an outline in a PowerPoint presentation here, and then we're going to spend most of our time navigating through PCDart in live. If you have questions, as Barry said, please pop them in so that I'm going to try to take pauses and bounce back and forth. But I'm just going to go ahead and jump in and give a little bit of an outline of what I intend to cover today. Custom reports, we're going to start there. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on building reports. What I'm going to kind of talk about are the maybe more finer points, crosstabs, temp groups that you can use within custom reports. If there are specific questions, again, please fire those in and we can go over those. User-defined graphs in PCDart, using those to evaluate transition, looking at days in group, setting that up inside PCDart, and the tracker series. There are 5 trackers now in PCDart. Those have been developed over the last several years, and they've added a few of them. It's always surprising to me how many producers and consultants are still unaware that those exist. I believe it's one of the most powerful parts of PCDart in using a producer's information. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on those. Again, not a lot of time on the fundamentals, a little bit more on the finer points or the tips or tricks, I guess. I would point you guys to, I've got a link up there on the screen right now. DRMS, who has created, supports, and develops PCDart, their website. They have a lot of information. If you're looking for more tutorials on how to operate the tracker series, If you go to that link, and I think Barry might throw that up on the YouTube screen as well for you so that you can see it later. That's a great resource if you're looking for fundamentals. So I would point you in that direction. Additionally, regarding PCDart, there is something that I would want to advise this group. It's called Tip Tuesday. It's another little known opportunity or resource that you can get signed up for through DRMS, where every Tuesday they'll send out an email with a little tip or a trick that is PCDart based. And so you'll just receive an email that teaches you a little something new about PCDart. There is a reference portion of their website that goes back and shows every Tip Tuesday they've created. So again, something you could go back and review. But those all exist within their website. So those links are there for you to use if you'd like to. So we're going to go ahead and get started. The first thing we're going to talk about in PCDart, I've got a herd up here. This is an actual herd that we work pretty closely with in our market area. I had the name and the herd code scrubbed, so we'll be able to use this data without any worry of divulging anything sensitive. But the first thing we're going to talk about are crosstabs. And in developing custom reports, crosstabs are a great way to stratify information, break it apart, and look at impacts on different groups of animals. And so assuming that some people may have never seen crosstabs before, we're going to start very basically. And when I open up a herd, I like to just wrap my head around some of what I would call the herd demographics. And at a general sense in PCDart, you have over here to the left, you've got the herd statistics, which give us a lot of information about this herd, number of cows in milk, their days in milk, the percent of the herd pregnant, etc. Pretty basic information that's gives you a little idea of some scope of the herd. But some of the things I like to look at are what I call herd demographics. And the first one would be the percent of 2-year-olds that are milking in a herd. That's something I think that there's a fair bit of focus on now in the industry, and maintaining more of those older cows, managing heifer inventories. And so I really like to see at a snapshot what percent of this herd is 2-year-olds. And I like to use dairy metrics crosstabs to do that. There may be a few ways you can get at this information, but I'm just going to go ahead and view what this looks like in crosstabs. Then we'll back up and I'll show you how a report like this is built. So I've got my report built here. I call it herd demographics by lactation, and I call it in milk. And down here in the bottom right-hand corner, hopefully my nice purple cursor is showing up for you. I'm just going to click view this in crosstabs instead of opening the report. And so now what I get is a bar graph here showing a representation of how I have this report built. And on the left, you can see I've got first lactation, 32% of the herd. It's going to go ahead and calculate for me the percentage that is represented of the total. Second lactation is 23, and then third and greater, 3 to 20 lactations is 45% of the herd. So I can see right away they've got a significant portion of mature cows in this herd and relatively few first lactation. That gives me a little bit of an idea. The way crosstabs works is I can come up here, I'm looking at it in a percent view right now, but I can go ahead and toggle if I want to see the raw count. I can toggle to raw count here, and I can see there's 843 first lactation, 598 second, and so on and so forth. So that gives me a little bit of an idea of what this herd looks like. I'm going to go ahead and close that, and we're going to edit this report, and I'll show you how you build a report to display the information that way. The key with crosstabs is to subgroup. So if you're familiar with building reports, we've got the herd title up here. We're telling PCDart we want to look at cows. I'm not using any of the major or minor sorts because I'm actually not interested in creating a list of animals. I always put the index in, and that'll make sense in a little bit. And I always use the control or filter database items that I'm using in my list. So if you're familiar with PCDart, on the left here in this white box, this is going to be what information shows up on the report. And in the center portion are the controls or filters that limit what animals are going to be looked at. So right now I'm using status code because I want to exclude dry cows. I'm not interested in how many dry cows. I want to know the percent of 2-year-olds that are actually milking. You can argue whether or not that's important. You can include dry cows if you'd like to. Something important to know about PCDart is if you leave this area blank, what it's going to provide to you is every animal in her current lactation. And again, that'll make a little more sense as we look at some other reports, and I'll bring out some finer points of why I think that's important to be aware of. But currently I'm looking at status code of 2 through 9, which if I highlight the status code, you can see what those different numbers mean. I'm excluding status code 1, which is dry cows. So where we move into creating a crosstab display or a bar graph display is in the subgrouping. So if I click on the tab next to the controls and filters, I can bring up this subgrouping opportunity where we can use a major and a minor sort. In this case, I'm only using the major, but I'm going to use the database item lactation number, which is database item number 8. And if you're not familiar with what those lactation or those database items are, you can search up here in the search bar by simply typing lactation. I can see that lactation number is database item 8, which I already have populated. And then I can set my sorts. I'm looking, I want to stratify them by 1 to 1, 2 to 2, and then mature cows in 3 to 20. So by subgrouping, I now can view this report as a crosstab, as I showed you previously. So we're going to close out of that, and I'm going to show you another report that uses crosstabs. It's another herd demographic report that I like to look at, but we can add a little bit of a twist to it. So I call this herd demographics by stage of lactation. So something I like to know when I look at a herd and they're 180 days in milk and they're 50% pregnant, I want to see how distributed the herd is. I want to see if they're lumped up with fresh cows, if they're relatively smooth, if they have a lot of late lactation cows. And I use this crosstabs report for that. So we're going to go ahead and view it again, and then same process, we'll back out and look at how the report's built. So if I bring that report up, now what we have is all the cows put into 30-day buckets. So 7% of the herd I can see is between 1 and 30 days in milk, 9% is 30 to 60. It just gives me a very quick visual representation that we've got a little bit of a group of cows out here that are greater than 240 days in milk, but nothing really significant. I certainly, as I look through these reports on numerous herds, you'll find this being weighted heavily one way or the other, depending on if they had calving issues or conception issues in the summer, and they tend to get lumped up. So all of a sudden you'll see they're really heavy on fresh cows right now, and you'll see a lot of tall bars here over to the left, or they've got a lot of tail enders as that lump moves through the herd as they get further out into milk. It certainly has an impact on facilities as well as production opportunity. So another graph I like to look at, but one thing I'd like to show you as a trick here that I'm interested in and I like to look at again is what proportion of these groups is first lactation animals. I've worked with some herds, as I'm sure many have, where they've purchased a lot of animals, or maybe they've gone through an expansion. And so we've got a lot of young animals in the herd as they move throughout. And this trick could be used for a lot of different things, but what I'm going to show you is we're going to go back out and we're going to look at how this report is built again. And then we'll get into some of the finer points. So I broke my own rule here. I didn't have ID in my database item. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that in, and I'm going to keep current milk in as something I want to look at within crosstabs. Right now I left my controls open, which means it's going to pull in any cow in her current lactation. So I'm including dry cows, but I'm going to go to subgroup, and I can see here I'm using days in milk on the reference date, which would be today. And then I put it into my 30-day buckets, and you can set these buckets to whatever you choose. I take it out to 390 days, and then I open it up to 1500. What I want to do now, though, is I want to see what proportion of those cows are first lactation in each one of those 30-day buckets. So now I can add a minor sort. And if you remember previously, lactation is database item number 8. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in here. And I'm going to say, I want to see first lactation by themselves, and I can see everybody else grouped up together. And so if I add that in, I can go ahead and look at that in crosstabs. And now I have two bars. I need to move the display here a little bit so I can see. So now I've got the red bars are first lactation, and the green bars are my mature cows. I can kind of see what part of each bar is represented as young stock or young animals. I don't really like the way this visual is set up though. It's a little bit ugly to me. It's hard to explain sometimes when you're explaining it to somebody else. So you can manipulate these graphs. There's a lot of things you can do within these user-defined graphs or crosstabs by clicking this little tools button up here where it says edit. There's a variety of things that can be done. The thing I want to show you today is clicking on this series box. I can stack this graph. I can turn it from a side-by-side graph. I can do it to a stacked 100%, but what I want to do simply is a stacked graph right now. So I'm going to click the stacked button. I'm going to close that, and you can see it took those columns and it stacked them on top. So now I still get that overall visual representation of where I have a little bit of a higher amount of cows out here and further in lactation, but I can see actually it's coming from 2-year-olds. There's the majority of those are 2-year-olds that had the increase, and a little bit came from the mature cows. Again, in this herd, it's not as dramatic, but you can imagine some herds you'll find some very telling information. And as we're trying to chase production, as we're trying to chase cow health and manage facility loads, these types of information, parsing it down this way, I find extremely valuable. If we're heavily weighted on cows further in lactation, are we going to get that milk production we're chasing, et cetera. If you remember on the database items I included, I had current milk listed as well. So what crosstabs will allow you to do is not only see the percent of animals that are in each group, but then I can use those database items to look at specific metrics like milk. So by clicking current milk, it will now adjust the graph to show what the cows in those buckets are giving for the database item I've selected. And again, in this case, it's current milk. So I get a little bit of what you might call a lactation curve showing here as to what the cow's production is by their day in milk buckets. And I get it for the mature cows and I get it for these 2-year-olds independently. Again, this is a graph I like to look at to kind of get an idea, as I know perhaps I'm weighted a little heavier in this herd. Again, this herd was flat, but in a herd where you're heavy weighted with these cows really far out in lactation, if they don't persist very well, you'll have a lot of animals dragging the herd average down. And so hopefully that helps guide decisions on how you get that production back, or what's really the potential currently when you consider the herd demographics. So hopefully I didn't go through that too fast. I'm going to go ahead to a couple more crosstab graphs before we pause for a minute. So hopefully if you have questions, you're entering those in. I have 2 more crosstab graphs I'd like to show you. And we're going to go ahead and just close this. And I've got another one here that I call nth week milk by lactation group. So I like to use crosstabs to look at transition quality by using 4th week milk or peak milks or 8th week milk. You can choose whatever flavor ice cream you like most on that. But the fundamentals of how you build this report would remain the same. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to edit this one, and we're going to go through and hopefully, I know I'm probably going through pretty fast, but hopefully with this being recorded, if you want to take screenshots later of the database items I use or how this is built, you can go back and do that. You can see the database items that I list in this report currently. I've got the index, and then I've got their 1st week milk, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, all the way out through 8th. And I included peak milk on this report. You could add 305 milk, you could add whatever you like. I don't have any controls or filters set right now, so I'm looking at all cows in current lactation. And when we get to subgrouping, I'm going to use my major sort as lactation. And you can see I've got it 1st to 1st, 2nd to 2nd, and then 3rd to 20. Then I'm going to set my days in milk on test date. This herd, I'm using test date milk weight, so I'm going to set it to what their days in milk was on that test date. So I use 75. And then I set my 30-day buckets, and I won't bore you with going through that, but you can see I set that out to 390 days, and that's where I stop. So if I use the crosstab view currently, and of course I made a change here and it didn't like that. Okay, we're going to close out and come back in. When all else fails, restart, right? That's the standard way. Okay, the report's there, so we're going to go ahead, we're going to view it in crosstabs. Okay, so now we've got a bunch of colorful line or bars here, and they don't really tell us a whole lot, but I've got my first lactation over here. I've got my second lactation in the center, and my mature cows over to the right. And you can see the legend on the right-hand side, each bar representing a 30-day window. And so this will make a little more sense when I tell it to not stop telling me the percent of cows in each bucket and tell me their 4th week milk. So what this is telling you and what you'll be able to do is look over time. So I can see this red bar is representing cows that are currently 1 to 30 days in milk, what their 4th week milk was. And then the green bar next to it here is going to be cows that were 30 to 60 days. So as we move from right to left across any of these lactation groups, we go back further in time to the most recent. And you can see, certainly with these mature cows, you can see a pretty significant downward trend on 4th week milk as you look across those 30-day buckets. You could argue a similar trend on the second lactation, maybe a slightly upward trend on first lactation. So a little bit interesting dynamic there. Depending on the herd size you're working with, as you start to parse this information out into these smaller and smaller buckets and lactation groups, as I'm sure you're all aware, we have to be careful that we've got enough numbers to represent and have some trust in the data. And crosstabs makes that pretty easy. So this is a larger herd, so we typically have enough data to do this with, but I can go up here to the bar legend, and currently I'm showing the average value for whatever is selected here in my drop down. I can toggle to the animal count, so I can see how many cows are represented in each bar chart, and I can also click both. So simultaneously, you can see I've got these stacked up, and I could adjust these bars out, but I can see the number of animals represented with a value of 126. There were 10 animals here in the center, and so on and so forth. This gets pretty busy in the graph formula. Some people prefer it to look at the numbers, and you have that opportunity in crosstabs. Over here on the upper left-hand side in where it says graph, next to that, you can toggle to a grid view. So if you prefer to see the numbers in the data that way, you can certainly do that. And I can see here my lactation groups, the number of animals, and the value or the average value of 4th week milk. So again, whatever flavor ice cream you like, you can go ahead and use that. I showed there's a lot of difference simply by toggling. There's 1st week milk, 8th week milk. You can decide what you'd like to look at. This herd, the trend certainly exists in all aspects. I do like looking at peak milk this way, simply because using the standard peak milk graph in PCDart, there's a lot of computational momentum, a lot of drag on changing that number, whereas this way I can look at isolated cows in 30-day buckets and compare them to cows previously or cohort groups. So again, you can throw into these database items whatever you might like to stratify, whatever you might like to dig into to show the difference and how you want to break that out. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. I'm going to pull up one more crosstabs report. No, excuse me, I have one more point to make here. This is why we take notes. So we're going to edit this. I want to bring something up for your consideration that I think is important with PCDart. I mentioned earlier that with no filters built in to this, it's going to look at every cow in her current lactation that currently exists in the herd. I would argue that we need to make sure we're including data from cows that have left the herd. If we want to measure transition quality, if we want to measure milk production and impact of management changes, it's not fair to exclude the data of cows that have been culled. We need to see what happened there. So in order to do that, you have to tell PCDart to include those cows, or they will not include left herd cows. The way that I accomplish that is by using 2 controls here in the filter section. The first would be to tell it, I want to use all cows that are currently in milk from 1 to 2,000 days. I just set a high filter there. And I'm going to put in an or statement. And I'm going to say, I also want you to include all cows that have left the herd, and you can pick whatever number you want to look at. I'm just going to say in the last year. If I look at this report and crosstabs again, you're not going to be able to really pick up a significant change in what this graph looks like. You won't pick up any if it doesn't bring it up for us to look at. There we go. So, but now I know that all of the left herd cows are also included in this. And I can tell that one great thing about PCDart in a lot of capacity, both crosstabs and the tracker series, is I can drill in, I can look at, so this group of cows here in this 109-day bar, this purple bar, if I click on that bar, I can bring up a list of these animals. So now I have an actual list of who those animals are, every database item, piece of information that I listed in my report. But the thing I want you to see here are these asterisks. Those are cows that have left the herd. Before I put that filter in, they wouldn't have been included. And there's a lot of data there. They had milk recording all the way out to 8th week milk. They got a peak milk score. And if we wouldn't have put that filter in place to include them in our data, we wouldn't have been looking at that. So I think that's a very important thing to consider. There's times to not use that. I'm sure there's times to use it, but be aware that that's how PCDart will treat the information if you don't use that filter. So now we can move on to the last crosstabs report that I had ready to go. We're going to close this. And the last one is very similar in the way it's put together. It's impact of age at calving on production. So again, managing inventories. When do you calve a heifer in? What's the right age? You can argue that. We could debate that for an hour, I'm sure, and not come to a perfect conclusion, but I've always found it compelling to show a producer their own information and what happens on their dairy. I've found some producers can get away, or some operations have the ability to calve in younger animals or grow heifers faster and get them to a size where they can compete. How they group them in their herd makes a big difference. So very similar to what I've shown you already. I've got my database items lifted over here to the left. And then I've got my sorts. So again, I'm looking at just lactation 1 now because I want to look at the impact of age at calving on production. So I'm telling PCDart, only give me first lactation animals that are in milk, and then include first lactation animals that have left the herd. And in my subgrouping, I'm going to use the database item age in months at calving date. And then I stratify that by individual months out to 27. So I'm going to look at this in crosstabs. And this does 2 things. It gives me a little bit of insight into their heifer repro. I can see when they're calving heifers in. You know, that's not, I like to see it not quite so spread out. I like to see that grouped up a little bit tighter for sure. But I can see how quick they're getting heifers pregnant. And then I can quickly show them, let's see on their peak milk. These 21-month-old heifers, they certainly don't peak as well. I could look at their 4th week milk, a little bit flatter. But again, every herd is going to be different. This dairy, we've made a lot of adjustments. We've looked at a lot of these things. So we've mitigated a lot of the drastic differences that we used to find. And this dairy used to calve in heifers at 21 months, and it was costing them milk at the end of the year. And we can see a little bit of a decrease there, but hopefully you can see the advantage of using crosstabs and how it might be able to help parse information out. So I'm going to close that. I'm going to pull this back up. I'm going to make a couple key points on crosstabs for you to remember. So crosstabs, you must subgroup. That's what gets that crosstab feature to be available. Without that, the crosstabs button won't appear. So you must use one of those subgroup boxes to break out the group. Include all control filters and database items in the display. So if you don't include the index number, I'm going to jump back here and make sure this makes sense for you. If you don't include index number over here, you don't have the ability to drill through and get that list of cows. PCDart won't let you do that. So it's important to always have the index. And then I always include the database items in my list that I'm using in my filters, because sometimes you'll find cows that are outliers. You'll wonder where they came from in the graph. And if you click on, like I showed you, to drill through, you can easily see based on your filter criteria, what lactation number they were, et cetera, et cetera. So it kind of helps you dive in to the information and understand it a little bit better. So remember that. Always use your database items and your controls in your display so you have the option to drill down and understand it better. And lastly, default for any custom report is to list all cows in their current lactation, and I should have put in here that are currently in the herd. So if you want to analyze that, you need to include the left herd cows. When you consider cull rates of 30% in herds not being abnormal or higher, you're excluding a lot of information by not making sure those left herd cows are in. So with that, I'll kind of wrap up the crosstabs portion. I'll kick it to you, Barry. I don't know if there's any questions we want to address or if we keep rolling.
Yeah, we have one real good question, Doug. I don't know if this is the right place to stick it in, but question is there a good way to use PCDart to drill into alignment between disease detection and protocols that are assigned in response to that disease? So the example given, if there's a set ketosis treatment protocol, can you run a report to kind of compare cows that were treated for ketosis versus those that were marked as having ketosis, for example?
Yes, I think we will get to an example of that if I'm understanding the question correctly. I've got we're going to go through that in activity tracker, a way to compare treatments. So there is a way within PCDart to use temp groups, which is what we're going to talk about next. So this is a good segue, and maybe look at the example I'm going to use today is metritis. And so a herd has a couple different protocols of how to treat metritis. And so maybe they change drugs, they change therapies, whatever it might be, to be able to track the efficacy of that and what the results were. PCDart does give you some capabilities to do that, to break those two cohort groups out and then look at whatever impact you might want to look at. And hopefully that will relate to the question and they could use it to do the same thing.
Maybe there's an easier question before we get away from the crosstabs then. So for people that haven't built reports from scratch before, do you think it would be worthwhile to, I believe, if I remember right, you can go into a standard report, save it as a different name, and then edit so that there's some structure already built if it's similar to what you want to generate? Is that correct?
Well, so what you've got in PCDart, good question, and we can certainly spend a little time on that. So you've got some standard reports here in the standard report set. They'll call them a report set. And those are not editable. You're not going to be able to touch those or do anything with those. So those are predefined reports that PCDart has put in. But you've got a very large set of user reports here. Now, any report in there is editable. And so PCDart will come with a lot of stock reports in here. And yes, any of these you could highlight, you could hit the edit button. You could copy and paste these database items. You can also, if you like a report and you just want to tweak it, by highlighting that report and right-clicking, you can copy to a new number. So I can take this production locales, I can copy that to a new number. It's gonna go find a vacant number slot to stick that for me. Okay, it's going to call it 80. That's fine with me. I'm going to say, okay, now I can scroll down to report 80. I've got a duplicate. I can go ahead and edit that and say, I liked the basics of this, but I'm going to tweak this to just meet my needs, and you could rename that and save it as such. So you can certainly do that. I guess we could go through just some other basics. I mentioned everything in PCDart is driven off a database item versus how you would generate a report in Dairy Comp. Those are the two that tend to get compared the most. This is a lot more point and click. To add database items, I mentioned they have these database items organized by their group or their class. It also has this search function that you can use. There is a line editor. You can, I'm not going to do that today. If you want to type in code, you can do that in PCDart. It's a little different language than Dairy Comp. But if you prefer to type in text strings to get your information, that possibility is there. Another opportunity for sharing these reports, if you have somebody you're working with that has reports that you like, you can import reports from another consultant. So let's say you work with somebody and they've got a set of reports that are exactly what you'd like to look at and they're willing to share those with you. There are steps you can take. I don't have the notes in front of me to detail that today, but DRMS is a great resource for that. Any affiliate in the DHI world that supports PCDart could help, but it's as simple as putting on a flash drive and then you could reload those reports into your PCDart consultant version so you don't have to rebuild them all.
Thank you.
Is that it for questions? We ready to move on?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so I'll keep moving. As always, I'm worried we're going to fill the time. And then as we move forward, I'm worried we're going to get everything in. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk about temp groups. I use temp groups a lot in PCDart. It's a great way to start grouping up cows, and it's going to lead right into that other question we had. So temp groups are a way. I'm just going to bring up a cow here, if I can click the right button, and show you. We've got a cow number 1 here, and I'm going to show you down here in the bottom left-hand corner. We've got her temp group number and her group number. So there's a difference depending on what part of the country you live in. Group is the management group. So that's group, or that's pen, or that's herd, wherever you live. I know it's called something a little bit different, but that's the number that the dairyman is going to use to identify where that cow lives currently. Temp group is an opportunity to take and create groups of cows within the herd temporarily and assign them a number so that I can do things with them from an analysis standpoint. There are some functional reasons a producer might use that to move cows between groups or things that way. So you want to be careful with temp group as you're perhaps working on a producer's computer. If you're on your consultant version, you can do whatever you want. You're not going to impact the dairy's information. But if you're doing any analysis on a producer's computer, you certainly want to have a conversation and see if they're using temp groups so that you don't create a problem for them. Because one thing key to remember is a cow can only have one temp group number at a time. So if he's using a temp group and has that assigned for cows, and you go ahead and overwrite that by putting her in another temp group, you've just erased what he had and potentially might have caused a problem. So there are multiple ways to assign a temp group, and I'm going to walk through those real quick. In the input desk up here for PCDart, where all data entry happens, there's a button down here in the 3rd column, almost at the bottom, called temp group number. By clicking on that, I could key in a list of cows. For instance, if a herd bought, I get this request a lot. I bought 20 cows and I'd really like to see what their milk production is versus my cows now, or something that way. There's other ways to do this, but if they didn't import with a herd code that could help them pick them out and they had the list, we'd come in here, key the cows in, and we're going to say cow 1, apply to all, and then we're going to put her in temp group 1, and I'm going to hit done. And if I close back out here and I go back to my cow 1, I can see that she's now in temp group 1. So that's one way that we can get a temp group number assigned. That's pretty straightforward. Another way you can assign a temp group, is through any user-defined report. So I've got a report here that I built that's called cows in dry period less than 50 days. So as I go out and work with herds, and some may have quite a wide variety of dry periods based on reproductive challenges or whatever may occur, showing the impact of that is always interesting. And so maybe I want to get all those shorter dry period cows, and maybe 50 days isn't short enough, but that's the report I built for today. So all I told PCDart was, on their previous days dry, I want all cows that had a 1 to 50 day dry period. And to assign a temp group number to those, over here on the right-hand side, you have an opportunity to put a temp group number. I'm going to use temp group 2. By opening this report, I've now assigned that temp group number to all cows that would come onto this report. Apologize for the different sizes here, but I can see here up in the right-hand corner, hopefully that's visible to everybody, it says TG, 02. So I know that I just assigned temp group number 2 to all the cows on this report. And so now I could take that back into crosstabs, and I have a herd or a report set up here that's called temp group analysis for milk production. And I could say, I've got my database items, I'm not going to review that, but I could say, show me by temp group all cows that are in group 2. And what PCDart will do is it'll put everybody in that I have in temp group 2 there, and anybody that's other will be in their own column. So now I'm comparing all those cows to every other cow on the dairy. And now if I look at it in crosstabs, I've got a list. I've got all the cows that had less than a 50-day dry period, which wasn't very many. There was 120 cows. But then I could stratify by whatever. I could look at 4th week milk. They actually did better. We all know how that goes. You're looking for something and you find what you didn't want to. And they actually milked better. But you can see the concept of how you can dump them in a temp group based off of a report. And then you could come in here and start to parse out. I probably didn't set my dry period limit low enough. But that's one way that you could use temp groups and get it assigned through a group. The other way that you can assign temp groups is through the tracker series. And so we'll have a couple things bleed together here, which is how I like to use all these tools. They start to kind of coalesce, and that makes it a little bit more powerful, is within the trackers. Before I move into that, I will let you know that to zero the temp groups, there's a button over here on the right. So if I went and assigned those temp groups, which I just did, and I say, all right, I want to start over, I can simply come in here and tell the program I want to zero the temp groups, and it's going to ask me which animals, cows or heifers. I'm going to do cows. It's going to warn me that it's going to zero all temp groups for all cows, and I'm okay with that, so I'm going to say okay. Again, you want to be cautious if you're on a producer's computer, but for today's purposes, we'll move forward into the tracker series and go from there. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on each tracker because we don't have time for that. But I'm going to highlight, like I said, some things I use these for. These were developed over the last few years, started with conception tracker and heifer tracker and added a few more, and they're very powerful. And once you start to understand how to use the controls and filters in one of these, you can basically run all of them. They're very similar in how they're set up. We're going to start with the activity tracker. And so this is a little bit daunting when you first open it, if you've never seen this before, but as you start to spend some time with it, it's really not that scary. There's not a lot of filters that I change on this. I'll show you a few of them that I do so that you kind of understand some of the implications. But down here at the bottom, or up at the top, excuse me, right now I'm going to look at all these events by month. I'm looking at all the lactation groups in cows, and I'm looking at the last 12 months, which is what it'll default to. Down in the bottom left-hand corner, I've got my activity list. I can see these are all the standard activities, and then any of the activities that the producer may have started to put in that he's tracking health conditions on. So again, some of these are standard and you'll recognize them, and some of them they've put in. So Ultrabac 7. That was a user-defined one. Bacterial infection, hyperruminant. Those are ones producers had put in to track things. I'm just going to tell it, I want to look at everything, and I'm going to preview this report. So now I get a table by month across the top here. I get the events down the left-hand side, and then I get each case and the number of cases represented in each month. I get a total column here, and I can scroll down. I can see they had 193 retained placentas last year, 348 cases of metritis, and so on and so forth. So I won't go into each area, but one thing I want to point out, and I think a good representation of this to help you understand is either metritis or cystic ovaries. See, we have 430 cystic ovary entries. Right now, it's going to count every time that was entered in the program. And maybe we want to see how many novel or unique cases there were. So what I can tell Activity Tracker to do down here with this checkbox is not to count the repeats in a lactation. I only want to see how many individual cows were cystic, not how many times a cystic cow was declared. So now if I preview that, I bet you we're going to have a different number. We had 430, I believe, before I told it to not count repeats in lactation, and looks like I might have confused the program in doing so. So like all of us, sometimes you just got to take a deep breath and grab another drink of coffee while it thinks. Well, I did not like that. And I will state I've been having some computer issues lately. I was a little bit worried this might give us some fits today, but we're going to go ahead and close that. Apologize.
They're rolling out new software at big rollouts, then you're allowed to do that once in a while, Doug.
I appreciate that. What you would have seen, and I'm not going to try that again. I'm not sure what my computer, again, I've been having some some specific trouble with it, but it would have reduced the number of counts. So I find this with herds, metritis, for instance. Some herds, every day they treat them for metritis, or every day they treat them for X, whatever, fill in the blank, they might re-enter that health condition. That's part of their protocol, and there's a reason they're doing that, but then it's going to very much inflate the number of cases of whatever that you're dealing with, just by how they're entering it. So just be aware that you can remove those counts by lactation by unchecking that number. So I want to talk about, I use this a lot to look at the number of cows that are sold or died in a herd, especially under 60 or 30 days in milk. So up at the top here are all the cull events. So we've got the number of fresh, the number that were sold, the number that were died, and you can also differentiate between dairy and non-dairy culls. If this herd is selling fresh heifers or something that way, we certainly want to be aware of that. So I'm going to select just those items for this, and I'm going to preview that. So I can see right now that in the last 12 months, they've sold 785 cows. They had 81 die. They didn't have any dairy culls because there's nothing here. These were all non-dairy culls for a total of 866. So I can see that in a table format as it happens by month. But what I find more useful is if we close back out of this, up at the top under select report type, if I tell it I don't want to look at it in month, I want to look at it by days in milk, and I go ahead and preview that. Now I've got, instead of month windows, I'm looking at day in milk. So between 1 and 29 days in milk, I've got all the animals freshened, obviously. We sold 70, 20 died for a total of 90. And there's a checkbox up here to show percentages to number of calving. So if I click that, it'll automatically calculate for me that I add 3% of the cows leave under 30 days in milk, and I had 1.5% more in the next window, so a total of 4.5% of the number of cows that freshened left in that 30-day or that 60-day window. Another advantage of activity tracker or any of the trackers that I want to showcase, and it makes sense here, is you can continue to drill through to understand what's behind any list of animals that's here. For instance, we've got some cows that left that were 0 days in milk, and so you might look at that and say, what's going on with those cows? You have the ability to click here and say, who are those cows? So here's 8 cows that were culled that were 0 days in milk. I can see the remarks that the herd entered over here at the right, still making me wonder, well, why did they have 0 days in milk? I can double click on an individual cow from here and get to her cow page. I can see, okay, yep, she's left the herd. If I look to her status, I can see what happened to this cow. She was pregnant, verified, she went dry, and she left in the dry pen. So I don't know the reason. They put in a reason of 60, but the reason she has 0 days in milk is because she was a dry cow when she left. But any of these groups of cows that live here, if you want to get to the list of animals or the data behind it, simply by clicking on that list, you have the ability to open up, see who those cows were, what the remarks, there's some information that is provided. You can also from here assign temp groups. So I said there was another way, and this is another way that you can assign temp groups. I can also export this list to Excel if I want to do some other manipulation with it. But assigning temp groups is very helpful, and we'll get back to that. I'm not going to do it with this group of animals. I do want to point out one other thing in PCDart that I think is important for you to be aware of if you're going to use this to evaluate cows leaving in 60 days. Currently, the default settings would be any cow that's left up until today and any cow that's calved up until today. So the percentage of cows is obviously basic math of the numerator and denominator, and we need to control those, in my opinion, because a cow that freshened 2 days ago hasn't really experienced the full risk of those 60 days to see if she's going to leave. So we can filter that in tracker by coming up here to the cohorts tab. If I click that, right now it's going to ignore a calving cohort, but I'm going to uncheck that, and I'm going to say, don't show me any cows unless they've been here for, and I just moved back roughly 60 days. So I'm only going to look at cows that calved 60 days ago or more in my analysis, so that I'm not moving those numbers around or getting bad data. And so then I'm going to preview that, and I'm going to turn that in. It changed them slightly, not significantly in this herd, but you certainly will find herds that can be very significant. And we end up with still about 4.6% of the cows leaving there. So as we move on in the trackers, I will show you, we'll get into, I'm checking my notes now, I apologize. I think we'll get into setting these temp groups and then what you can do to analyze different factors. So I'm going to go back and select everything again and preview this list. And just show you how to set the temp groups, for instance. We talked about metritis, or I did earlier, and looking at the impact of different treatment groups. So if I wanted to look at this metritis group, I could take the whole group and I could assign the temp group number right here. So it's going to select all of those animals, all 286 cows, and I'm going to put them in temp group. I'm going to put them in temp group 4. So it tells me it put all 286 in temp group 4. So I say perfect. I'm going to write that down because I have a short-term memory. And now I can close this out. And we're going to look at just the impact of metritis on milk production. So again, I've got the standard report built, which is really handy. Temp group analysis for milk production. All I need to do is edit that. I need to change my temp group to 4 now, so that I can compare all the girls that had metritis to the rest of the herd, any cows that didn't have metritis. I'm going to put that in crosstabs. And I'm going to see here, I've got my 286 cows represented compared to the rest of the dairy. And I could look at this by anything I want to. I'm going to look at 4th week milk. So 4th week milk, again, I gave up about 5 pounds. There was an impact. And you can use this for lameness. You can use this for any of those events that's tracked on the dairy to start parsing out information to show what is the impact of this on that. And this and that is up to you and your imagination. Now, we talked about looking at treatment groups. The cool thing with the tracker series, I'm going to go back to right where we were before and select all and preview. And I'm going to get back down to that group of mastitis, or excuse me, metritis cows. And over here in the remarks, I can see there's a variety of things. They're using XNL, they're using Polyflex, and I'm not here to advertise for any company or any therapy at all. So I'll say that right now. But I can sort by remarks. So I just clicked on the remark column and it sorted it by remarks. So what I'm going to do is scroll down and just show you how you could take, so we can see here that they were using Exceed, but here we've got XNL. I can highlight these cows and I'm going to drag that down. Pretty soon we'll hit the Polyflex cows there. Okay, right there. So I'm going to stop at XNL and I can assign temp group. And now I'm just going to assign temp group. We'll do temp group 5. And I'm going to say, okay. And it's going to take those 96 specific cows that were treated with XNL for metritis and put them in group 5. And I'm going to say, okay. And I could take Polyflex, looks like Polyflex and Polyflex. And I'm going to scroll down. And I've got all the Polyflex cows now. So I can assign those into temp group 6, let's say. So now I've taken those 2 treatment groups and I could slice and dice that however I want. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because, again, I'm not here to show any difference in the quality of how we treat these cows, but hopefully you guys can see the value of what you can do here. This is a great time to talk about those remarks and the value. As you start to use this, what you'll run into is you'll come in to a herd, and I've worked with these herds for quite a long time, and we've had discussions, but maybe previously when I first started, I'd come in here and one herds person might call it Polyflex, one herds person might put in Poly, one herds person might call it Flex. And so you come in to try to look at something like this, and you can, but it takes a lot more time. I've got to dump it into Excel and I've got to correct all of those names, and it creates a mess. So we started to have discussions about standardizing those things and making sure whether it was a remark on how they're treating these cows and bring some consistency there, because now we can start to really look at this information. It would be the same thing on cows leaving the herd. That's always a big one. When cows are dying, and we look at that, and we look at this list of cows that are dead, and we look at the remarks, and we say, all right, we've got some hemorrhagic bowel, and then we see injury. When I work with herds that have a lot of injuries, we start to talk about how can we describe these in a way that helps us analyze what's happening on the farm. So some guys are calling it injury, and then we've got splits, and we've got different things. So I would really encourage you to, and it'll be a self-motivating thing if you start to use these, because you'll get into it and you'll get frustrated that you've got 26 different remarks that you could bucket things in when you're talking about cows leaving the herd. And it's a lot better off for you and the producers if you can bring some consistency. We can learn a lot more there. So I kind of glossed over that treatment groups a little bit faster. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but you see the functionality. You can come into these groups, you can sort them however you'd like to. You can assign those temp group numbers. I want to remind you that a cow can only be in one temp group at a time. So don't get in a hurry with this and think, I'm going to have my standard report, so I'm going to put all my retained placentas in group 1, and then I'm going to move on and put all my metritis in temp group 2, and I'm going to put all my pios in temp group 3, then go look at it, because you're probably shuffling cows now. If a cow had got coded, let's say, for metritis and a pio, you're going to pull her out of the metritis temp group you just made and put her into the pyometra group you just made. And they won't be in the temp groups you think they are. So you got to look at them one at a time. So I think on the activity tracker, that's kind of what I had to show. Are there any questions? We could pause for a minute and I'll review here. I have a couple. You can, we already went through that. I apologize. So assigning temp groups, input desk, you can hand key, you can use report assignment, you can use the trackers to assign temp groups. As I just said, cows can only be in one temp group at a time, and you certainly want to check with the producer before zeroing. And on the activity tracker, watch your calving cohorts, make sure that you've got the group of animals that you're looking at that you want, and think through that. PCDart doesn't do anything wrong, it does its default, and you need to know what you want to chase and who you want to include. Be aware of those drill down capabilities. Clicking on any of those boxes, you can get down to the individual cows and their records, which is sometimes very helpful. We just went over splitting treatments by temp group for analysis. And then I just covered driving discussion with producers on recording consistency to approve analysis. So there, with that, Barry, I don't know if there's any questions we take right now.
Yeah, I think there's a couple we might be able to address before we're totally out of time here. So one that we maybe don't even have to look at the software question, when you split by herd demographics, is that influenced at all by test day information?
So I'm assuming they're talking about those first reports I pulled up with the crosstabs. It depends on what you drive the report on. So it depends on how you get your offload. I always try to get the offload from the dairyman's computer versus downloading from DRMS or from the test processing center. The reason is I get a lot more data rich database by pulling it off the computer. Non-essential data isn't transferred. However, if you're using a downloaded test date, when you build this report, I'll navigate back here. So maybe it'll make a little more sense. If you're using a downloaded test date, or excuse me, data set, I picked the wrong report, guys. Sorry. Let me get into the demographics by stage of lactation. If you're using a downloaded from a processing center, you would use 75 here, which is days in milk on test date. I'm using days in milk on reference date because I downloaded this off the producer's computer. So I can look at it as of today or as of the day I took the download. I can set my reference date to that, the day I took the download. That means I have the most recent up-to-date information. If you're downloading it from DRMS or from any of the other processing centers, I would recommend you use 75, which is days in milk on test date. but some of it depends too on what you're looking at, current milk versus daily milk, for instance. So this producer has daily milk weights. If I want to look today at cows' days in milk and what their milk production is, I probably want to use his daily milk record. If I'm looking at test day information and I'm looking at days in milk on test date, I probably want to use their current milk, which would be their test day milk. Hopefully that makes sense. So I think it kind of depends on what you're looking at and what you're chasing after, but just understand that if you're receiving a download from a processing center, I would drive the majority of these reports off of test day metrics versus reference day metrics.
That makes sense. Great. So if you have time, maybe we can go through an example of this, but you talked about ways to look at splitting out temp groups to look at impacts. This particular question is maybe a little trickier. So if you've moved cows, say from a high to a low pen, and you want to sort of assess how has that impacted production of those cows that you've recently moved, would you use a temp group approach, or how would you go about that?
Yeah, I got to think through that. So you take a group out. You certainly could. You know, that would be a case where you would key those cows into a temp group and say, what is their milk production? I'm also thinking about there's an opportunity to look at days in group and what their production is and whether or not that would work. I was going to cover that as well. PCDart has the opportunity to predefine group numbers, and then you can look at the impact of the amount of time they spend in a group, which I think is valuable sometimes. If I was trying to look at a specific group of cows as they entered a pen and what the impact was, I think that's temp group would probably be the best way. I would probably include some factors on days in group so that I could compare them to, you know, other cows that were in that group for the same amount of time, to make sure you have some kind of a control. But let me walk through, if we have time, I don't know if we get kicked off at an hour, Barry, or if we can go over slightly, but
No, we can keep going.
I'm just going to walk through the group settings because I think that's a valuable one that some people might have some interest in. And I think it kind of relates to that question. And before I move off of that, I would say if I didn't answer that question very well, because I do need to think that through, I did provide my email earlier, or you could reach out to Barry. I'd be happy to help try to answer any questions that we can't cover or answer fully today. But one of the things they developed within PCDart that I really like is the ability to define groups. And I really like to have discussions with producers about how we're moving cows in transition and how long they're able to spend in those pens. I was always frustrated to not be able to take a very good look at that. So they developed an opportunity to do that. And the way that you would accomplish it is you have to tell the computer, you have to tell the program which groups are which by coming up into file and management options. So again, it's file and management options. And if I click on management options, I'm going to get this opportunity to define my close-up and my groups X and Y. So if I click on that tab, I've got some generic group X and group Y that I could define anything I want to look at. I could set these for if there's a post-fresh group, or if there's a pre-fresh group, or et cetera, et cetera. You can put whatever group number you want to look at in here. So again, you figure out what kind of ice cream you like to eat and you go ahead and go after that one. I'm going to focus on the close-up groups. I know this herd is uses the group number 12 for their close-up, so I'm going to predefine that. It's already set there. You could add multiple groups if they have more than one, and you're going to apply that and hit close. And now what that gives me the ability to do in crosstabs is come in here and look at, I've got a report built called days and close-ups. So I'm going to view this in crosstabs. And this is always a fun one to have with a discussion with producers about what the protocol is and then what really ends up happening. You know, how long do cows get in the close-ups? And I commonly get the answer 21 days, or, you know, it's always 3 weeks, or it's longer than that. And you say, all right, well, let's look and see what's really happening, because slugs, facilities, all those things impact how closely they can accomplish what they think their goals are. I can look at this dairy and I can see what's actually happening. So I can see cows, there's 2% of the cows, and I'm going to move this to count. 90 cows got 5 days in the close-up pen. 500 cows were between 6 and 10 days. 1,000 cows had between 11 and 16. And so on and so forth. So really quickly, I can get a quick visual representation of how good they're doing at getting those cows 21 days. Not very good in this herd right now, at least. They've really had to pump some cows through those pens. And so now I can split that out and I can say, what's the impact? Again, as you think about crosstabs and how you can monitor this, I can show what the peak milk is. Now, this herd, days in close-ups having an impact on peak milk performance to the tune of 6 pounds. Again, I'm looking at all cows, so you could argue we might want to go in here and edit this and only look at first lactation. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to do that by editing the report. But that takes just a second. And you could set these up for predefined reports by lactation if you like, so you don't have to come in and edit these. Because that tends to be, oh, not first lactation. Not thinking they don't have dry periods. So second lactation, what their dry period was. And we could look at the impact there. And so, yeah, we've got almost a 10-pound difference in peak milk between cows that don't get much time in that close-up pen. So the question that was raised, how do you parse out different times in pens or the impact of these group movements? And that's how I'll use days in group. I'll use that to show impact of days spent in any particular group. And like I said earlier, you can use those groups X and Y. Those are just database items. I guess let me show you that real quick. That's how I'm subgrouping. 383 is days in the close-up group. And those other X and Y, I'm going to just type days in group. And so these are the database items that would show you the days in group X, days in group Y. They also have previous days in group X and previous days in group Y. So there's some functionality or some flexibility. It's a pretty dynamic way to be able to look at impact of moving animals. The last thing I'll show you with that, and I know we're over on time, but one real quick thing. Some people have different, like to look at information a little bit differently. If you like scatter plots and you like to put things in there, you have that ability. If you saw where I went here, you've got herd graphs that are predefined in PCDart. There's a lot of valuable graphs I use in here. You also have cow graphs that look at individual animal information here. Don't miss this little tab up here that says user defined graphs. So I just have a few built, but using that close-ups information or the close-up evaluation we just looked at, let's look at days in close-up versus peak. And I'm going to plot that. It's going to take it a second to think through. So I now have peak milk on the left here. I've got days in their close-ups on the right. Not a real tight fit to that line. As you can see, there is a slightly upward trend. I have the opportunity to filter that. I could say, just show me those first lactation cows here if I wanted to. Yeah, I did it again. Not first lactation, second lactation. There we go. So there's our second lactation cows. In here, you have the ability to set some crosshairs if I wanted to, and I wanted to see what percent were, by dragging that over to the right, I can, there we go. I can set the crosshairs. And what I want to just show you, even though it doesn't make a lot of sense to use that on this graph with the time we have, it'll calculate the percentage that I set my crosshairs at. So if I wanted to set these crosshairs, I'll use this a lot for somatic cell graphs that I've created. So we can show current somatic cell previous, looking at cure rates, looking at new infections, et cetera. These crosshairs are pretty dynamic. They help speed things up in calculating. So I guess I know we're running out of time, so I'll pause again and see if there's any other questions, Barry.
Doug, I think you covered all the ones that people posted, and I think you did an outstanding job. We got some really positive feedback. So thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to point out quick before we tie up here?
No, I think that's it. I mean, I would really advise you to just get into those trackers and play with them. That's how you learn them the best. They're all very similar. Like I said, they're very powerful. And as you use them more, you start combining those things between temp groups and trackers and crosstabs. And like I said, when we started, I think this is all about, you know, either helping your employees or helping your producers use data and turn it into information. That can help them make good decisions. And it looks like, unfortunately, we could be in for a rough time in the industry again. I know we've lost a lot of the gains for futures. Hopefully those come back as quick as they went away. But, you know, hopefully some of these tools can help our producers get through and make good decisions. So appreciate the opportunity, Barry, and I appreciate everybody's time. Again, if you have questions or need clarification on anything I covered, please reach out to Barry. He can provide you my contact information if you didn't get it in the beginning. And stay safe.